I work at a Montessori school, which is essentially a very small school with 3 to 4 tiny classrooms for children. The classrooms are located in the lower level of a church, and my job is to clean them every night after classes. Cleaning all the rooms typically takes me about 2 hours, but since I also work the closing shift at a nearby grocery store, I usually don't get to the school until around 10:30 most nights. Something you should know is that the church shares a parking lot with an old people's home directly across from it. I'll admit, a lot of weird and creepy things have happened at this school, but the strangest occurred just a couple of weeks ago. I had just finished cleaning the second room and was moving my cleaning supplies to the third room. It was probably around 11:45 at this point, so I was running a bit behind and trying to rush. As I crossed the hallway to the third room, I heard loud bells echoing throughout the church upstairs. Someone had rung the doorbell. Nobody has ever shown up during any of my shifts before, as it was always so late and both the school and the church were closed hours earlier. Feeling a bit nervous, I slowly made my way up the stairs and towards the door. It was one of those wooden doors with large tinted glass windows. Trying not to be seen, I looked around the corner to see who was outside. There was an old woman, probably in her 70s or 80s, standing right outside the door. I backed away before she could notice me. I decided to ignore it, figuring she had just wandered off and that one of the attendants at the old people's home would pick her up. I started my cleaning again, mopping the floors of the room. But only a few minutes later, I heard banging echo through the halls. I jumped a little, then stopped to listen. The banging stopped for a few seconds and was followed by the old lady yelling from outside. It was hard to make out what she was saying, so I made my way back upstairs where I could hear her more clearly. She was calling for someone named Abby, repeating the name over and over. As I got closer to the door, the woman stopped. I looked around the corner and saw that she wasn't outside the door anymore. It was unsettling, but I assured myself that someone had probably come and gotten her after hearing her yelling. I turned around and, out of the corner of my eye, saw the old lady staring at me through the window beside the stairs. She looked me in the eyes and yelled, "Abby, help me." Her eyes were wide open, and her hair was long and gray. I immediately ran back downstairs and locked myself in one of the classrooms. I took out my phone and called the old people's home next door, explaining the situation and asking if maybe she had wandered away from them. The lady on the line told me that everyone was accounted for. They would have noticed if anyone had left, as they are required to check out. She said she would double-check with security and asked me to stay on the line just in case. While I waited, I heard banging on the window upstairs. A few seconds later, the woman on the phone described the old lady's features and asked if that was her. I said yes and mentioned that she kept yelling for someone named Abby. There was a small moment of silence. I softly spoke into the phone, "Ma'am." She replied, warning me not to approach the woman and to find somewhere safe to stay until they could have someone come out and get her. This just made me even more terrified. I stayed in the room, still listening to the repeated banging on the window from upstairs. This building was pretty old, and I wasn't sure how long those windows would hold if she kept banging on them. Eventually, I heard some male voices from outside and, after what sounded like a struggle, they left. I sat there for a few minutes, just thinking about what had happened. Then I got up and finished cleaning the rooms. The whole situation felt unreal, and knowing that the old lady was in the building across from me still makes me nervous. I never found out who Abby was or why the lady was trying to get into the church, but I'm just glad I never opened the door. I used to work the register at a local gas station, though I've since left as there were a lot of strange things that happened when I worked overnight. But this one situation in particular will stick with me forever. I only worked the night shift a few days a week, usually Friday and Saturday. My shifts were usually boring, just a game of trying to stay awake. The only thing I really had to do was stock the shelves and occasionally help a customer. I would get a lot of drunk people, families on road trips, and sometimes even groups of friends. But for the most part, it was pretty quiet. One night, around 2 a.m., I hadn't had a customer in over an hour and was starting to doze off a little. The desk was around the corner from the entrance, and there was a bell on the door that rang when somebody walked in, so usually falling asleep wasn't too big of a deal. I woke up after a few minutes, hearing the bell ring, and a few seconds later, saw a customer walk in. He looked like a typical 30-year-old man, probably there for some beer or a snack. He walked around for a little bit, down every aisle, looking at everything. Now, I've worked in retail for a long time, and I know what it looks like when someone is looking for something specific. But this man had nothing in mind, he was just browsing the shelves. During the day, this is pretty normal, but people don't usually come in at 2 a.m. to browse gas station shelves. I looked out the window to my left to see if he was filling up his car and maybe just passing the time, but there were no cars outside. A couple of minutes went by before he eventually looked over at me, said thanks, and walked out. I didn't know what to make of that, but I just figured he had stolen something small and was being a jerk about it. The whole situation left my mind after a few minutes, and I started to get really tired again. This time, I decided to grab my cart of items to stock and start filling up the shelves to pass the time. I'm not sure how long I was stocking, maybe 20 minutes, before I saw a man show up at the end of the aisle I was stocking. It made me jump a little as I had never heard the door ring. This guy was wearing a large hoodie in dark clothes. I knew right away that something was off. The man continued to the back of the store, and I immediately went back behind the counter. I tried not to stare, but I noticed that as he walked down the aisles, he wasn't looking for anything, he was just browsing. It clicked in my head that this was the same guy from earlier, but he had changed clothes for some reason. I realized that he had probably come initially to scope out the place before doing whatever he planned on doing. I started to panic in my head. The man began to come down the aisle closest to the counter, and I could see something heavy in his front hoodie pocket. I made a split-second decision to try and prevent any further escalation and said, "Welcome back, sir. Need help finding anything?" He made eye contact with me, and I could tell he knew exactly what I was trying to do. He approached the counter without saying a word and brought his hand out of his pocket, revealing a small handgun. Then he grabbed a small pack of gum from beside the counter and placed it in front of me. He said, "Just this." Confused and in shock, I didn't react for a few seconds before nervously scanning the gum. Still holding the gun, he took out $1 from his jeans pocket and threw it on the counter. Then he said, "Thanks," and walked out. I was in total shock, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I ended up reporting the situation to the police and calling my manager, who didn't pick up. No updates ever came out of the situation, but it had me on edge for the last few months that I worked there. I'm still unsure of what really happened that night or what the man's intentions were, but honestly, I'm glad I never found out. I work as a cybersecurity analyst for a large office company in my town. It was my first job in the field, so naturally, I had to work the overnight shift that nobody else wanted. Surprisingly, working overnight was more peaceful than I expected. My main task was to review log files to ensure nothing suspicious happened while the rest of the crew was sleeping. This meant I was alone in the office building for several hours. Staring at a screen for hours on end in the middle of the night was hard on my eyes, and without anyone there to keep me company, staying awake was challenging. I started setting soft alarms on my phone to go off every hour to make sure I didn't sleep through my entire shift. I had been working this job for about 4 months when this incident occurred, and I still work there now. It was a regular night, and my coworker had just finished his shift at midnight and left the building. A few minutes later, I got up, started the coffee machine, and walked down the main hallway to do a general check for anyone still in the building. This was my regular routine to make myself more comfortable. I sat back down at my desk, took out my phone to set the alarms, and continued with my work. About 20 minutes later, I realized I had never heard the coffee machine beep that it was done, so I went to check on it. I walked down the hall to the small coffee station and saw that there was no coffee in the pot. The entire coffee machine was turned off. I thought it was weird but didn't give it much thought. I just turned the machine back on and went back to my desk. As soon as I sat down, I noticed my phone wasn't where I had left it on the desk. I patted down my pockets and ran back to the coffee station, but it wasn't there either. I replayed my actions in my mind and knew for sure I had placed it right next to my keyboard. I started to get really freaked out and looked around frantically. My desk was in the middle of a large room with other desks and computers. I felt like I was being watched, knowing that someone else had to be there with me. Nervously, I called out in a shaky voice, hoping it was just a friend playing a prank on me. I waited for a few seconds, but there was no reply. As I stood by my desk, another few seconds went by before I heard soft shuffling from behind a desk in the far corner. Almost immediately after, my phone alarm rang from the opposite corner of the room. My first thought was that there were 2 unknown strangers in the room with me. I instantly started running for the door out of the building. I didn't hear any footsteps behind me, but I didn't take any chances. I ran across the street to a neighboring gas station and called 911 to report the intruders in our office building. The police arrived quicker than I expected and searched the building. They brought out a man after only a few minutes, though I didn't recognize him at all. They also retrieved my phone, which they found behind some boxes in the corner of the office. The man was found with a small knife in his pocket. The next day, we got more information about what really took place. Apparently, the man was a former employee who had been fired recently before I started working there. He told the police he was trying to scare me to get me to leave the building so he could take back his company laptop. He claimed he had information on it that he wanted. It all seemed really weird to me, and I'm not sure I trusted his reasoning for breaking in. My coworkers did say they remembered the guy and that he was definitely a bit strange. I'm glad I got out of there when I did because I'm not sure what would have happened if his plan didn't work and I chose to stay in the building.